Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Barb St. Marie. I am chair of the research committee through the American Society for Pain Management Nursing. And we'll just give it a few more minutes while people are connecting. Thank you for being here. Okay, so I have 5 o'clock Central Standard Time. Okay. So together with the American Society for Pain Management Nursing, and the Helping to End Addiction Long-Term Initiative, or the NIH HEAL Initiative, we are presenting a virtual grand rounds highlighting HEAL-funded pain research progress that may affect clinical nursing practice. Because as nurses, we are on the front line of pain management efforts, HEAL is eager to share the work with the important community that we are of nursing towards implementation of the clinically relevant, clinically important findings that may improve the lives of individuals. So we're so looking forward to hearing from Dr. Linda Porter. Dr. Porter is the director of the National Institute of Health's Office of Pain Policy and Planning. She holds a bachelor's degree in physical therapy from McGill University and a PhD in neuroscience from Boston University. Dr. Porter trained in neurophysiology at Rockefeller University and then served on faculty of the Uniformed Services University until joining the NIH in 2003, where her role includes coordinating activities of the NIH Pain Consortium and the Interagency Pain Research Coordinating Committee, whose missions respectively are to advance the NIH and interagency pain research agenda. She co-chaired the development of the National Pain Strategy and the Federal Pain Research Strategy. She had a key role in the development of the NIH HEAL, which is Helping End Addiction Long-Term, this initiative, and currently is a scientific lead for the pain research supported by HEAL. Dr. Porter has been recognized for her work through the President's Award from the American Academy of Pain Medicine or Pain Management, from the NIH Directors Award, and the Emma and John Bonica Public Health Service Award from the American Pain Society. So we are all honored to have Dr. Porter here with us today and looking forward to hearing about the research. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Barb. I'm really thrilled to be here and to sort of launch off your program of Grand Rounds. I am going to move my screen around a little bit so I can see the share screen. And I've got something in the way here that says transcript on. Yeah, let me see, bear with me one moment. All righty, is that all set to go? People can see the screen? Okay, great. Then I'll get started. I have a long story to tell because HEAL is now in its 5th year. And so I think that we've got many accomplishments to talk about, many hopes for great accomplishments from the program, but also for future research in this area. And keeping in mind that HEAL is an integrated program that provides research funding not only for pain management, but also for opioid use disorder and to address the overdose crisis that is currently greatly expanding, unfortunately, in the country. So tonight I'm going to focus on the pain side, but I will start with just a tiny little bit of an overview of the program in its entirety. So just got to go through a list of the big programs that are going on, primarily through the National Institute of Drug Abuse for HEAL. And so just keep in mind that it's much bigger and broader than what I will tell you about tonight. So let's start out with a little bit of background on why we need HEAL and why we have needed it for many years. So looking at some of the population data, most of this comes from the CDC by way of the National Health Interview Survey data that they have been collecting for many years. Nationwide, we know that of American adults, 50 million live with chronic pain. And chronic pain for that survey is defined as pain that has occurred within the past 3 months. 25 million, and this is a huge number, live with severe pain every day. And 20 million live with high-impact chronic pain. High-impact chronic pain is defined through the National Pain Strategy and collected through the National Health Interview Survey. It's defined as pain that interferes with your life. So this could be your social activities, going to work, going to school. So pain that is impactful enough to really keep you from living a full life. We also know that pain affects women more than men, and this is especially true for chronic pain conditions, some of which are female specific, and some of them are much more prevalent in women than men. So when we look at chronic pain in general, and this includes a number of different pain conditions, 22%, and compared to 19% of men report chronic pain. 8.5% of women and 6.3% of men report high-impact chronic pain. So these are pretty significant differences due to many different reasons. But for now, we will just sort of observe the data. We know that pain increases over the lifespan, and this graph starts at 18 years old because this is where the National Health Interview Surveys are taken from. We know that children also have a number of different chronic pain conditions that are really unique to children's populations. It varies over the pediatric lifespan as well as the total lifespan. And we have a really good idea that early pain in the pediatric population leaves adults more vulnerable to chronic pain in their adult lives. We look to the right-hand side of the graph and we see that chronic pain often comes with other chronic conditions. So those who are ill are often, the very ill are often also suffering with chronic pain, either associated with the disorder or perhaps being more effective because of other processes. And if you look at lifestyles, we know from the high-impact chronic interview surveys that it does interfere with life, and we have a good idea of different aspects of life which are affected, including activities of daily living, social life, and certainly work limitations. So we also want to keep in mind the story on the side of opioid use disorder and the increasing numbers of overdoses. And if you look at the chart here, starting in 1999, the chart starts at the point where opioid prescribing was beginning to be seen as with some risks and dangers. But it really wasn't until we get up to 2015-16 that we see these huge increases in overdoses, primarily due to fentanyl, whereas earlier on, addiction and OUD and overdoses were primarily due to prescription drugs. With the drop in prescribing and the increased access to fentanyl, that picture has changed drastically. So a huge public health crisis, both in pain and both with OUD and overdose deaths. So we knew there was a great need for an initiative that would put more research into both of these areas. But at the time, we really didn't have a lot of increased funds to address the research portfolio. So in 2017, Dr. Collins, who was the director of the NIH at the time, put together a public-private partnership with the Foundation for NIH and Pharma, which is a collection of pharmaceutical companies that work together to provide better outcomes for living across the US, and with the NIH. And we talked to them about what is really needed in the area of OUD and pain research. And so they talked about both addiction treatment, overdose prevention, and pain management. And on the right-hand side, you see they had some very specific recommendations of what we should begin with. And this is before HEAL. So they said you really need better medication development. Analgesic development had dropped off considerably amongst the pharmaceutical companies because it's difficult. The trials are difficult, the conditions are complex, and the market was not really what some of the bigger pharmaceutical companies were targeting, partly because of safety issues. And so that we needed to do a better job of sharing data on what was already being developed in analgesics and OUD areas. And so, what were the dead ends that we didn't want to chase down with the limited resources that we had, for example? They also said clinical endpoints need to be better defined. Remember, this is 2017, and we need biomarkers. We need biomarkers for clinical trials. We need biomarkers for prognostic and diagnostic purposes. And they cited as a really difficult point for trials to be successful because we didn't have good biomarkers to predict what analgesic targets might be effective in the longer run. And we needed clinical trial networks, which is something that we did not have in almost any way, shape, or form for pain care, for pain research, rather. The other thing that we did to inform the HEAL Initiative was to gather a group of experts, and we ran 3 different meetings for several days with asking each one of these areas, how do we best develop treatments for OUD and overdose? How do we best develop effective treatments for pain? And how do we understand the neurobiological mechanisms of pain, which, as you all know, it's very complex. Pain conditions are different, not shared mechanisms across the board. And then at the same time, we were developing the federal pain research strategy, which was a really broad effort to pull together experts in the field, including practitioners, researchers, people with lived experience, to look at what the federal government across all the agencies was doing in the pain research realm and what the gaps were. And this group put together a large set of prioritized recommendations of what we needed to do to move the research agenda forward. And so with all this information as background, HEAL was launched. And HEAL was launched because Congress, recognizing the huge public health problem, committed a very large sum of money to National Institute of Drug Abuse and NANDS, the Neurological Institute, to put research dollars into opioid and into pain management research. So HEAL started out in 2018 with an investment of $500 million. And on the pain side, we used all the informative descriptions of what we needed to target from the earlier efforts to really start to look at what HEAL would look like. Same was happening on the OUD side, but what did we really need to do to launch a really good pain research, a solid base, and what kind of gaps did we need to begin with? So these are sort of the overarching themes that HEAL started with for pain research. And these are the areas that HEAL was divided up to, like operational areas, if you will. So for OUD and overdose, they were put into 4 different teams, operational teams, and for pain into 2. And part of this, I think the reason for 4 teams is that NIDA had already had a fairly big portfolio in this area So for them, they were leveraging programs in the research arena that had already been started. We felt like some of the things for pain research were being built from the ground up. So thanks to HEAL, we've made huge progress in building the infrastructure, the workforce to really do some quality pain management over the years. So very briefly, what I'd like to do before we turn straight to pain research is to give you just a high-level overview of what's happening on the OUD and overdose side. And these are color-coded according to, sort of basic research, prevention and treatment research. Prevention would include that in children and other vulnerable populations. And the special programs in infants and children who had been exposed to opioids at the time, but now a broader array of drugs. And bringing that research into practice, particularly into large communities like statewide research programs that include schools, jails, just a broad area where they could embed the research findings into practice. So then here's a quick overview of, let's see, this is not advancing for, I don't know why. There we go. This is an overview of what we have set up and are moving forward, continuing to move forward some of these areas on the pain side with our HEAL dollars. And I'm not going to go through this entirely, but the idea is that this is color-coded, where you can see we're working in the discovery area to identify targets for pain therapeutics and actually to bring them through a pipeline to get them into the clinic. And then moving into translational areas where we're developing devices or tools for further research, and then into clinical trials at the level of safety, effectiveness, and pragmatic trials, all the way into implementation of the research into communities. HEAL is also sort of expanded out to a number of different cross-cutting areas that are really important to the overall research endeavor. And part of that is really bringing the people with lived experience into the research agenda from start to finish in HEAL. So from early discovery, this is a little bit harder for the engagement processes to happen, but all the way through the trials, we've had a really wonderful experience through the patient engagement endeavor. Increasing the workforce, trying to keep the workforce more diverse, but also targeting the research to diverse populations, and data, making it better data, more translatable data, and really looking forward to the future when we've got this huge pile of data that will be coming out of the HEAL initiative. We want to use it appropriately. So here, before we go into some of the highlights of the research agenda, I would like to just have us think for a moment about why pain management is so hard to do right and to get good quality pain care to everybody. And so it goes beyond research, but the research agenda needs to keep in mind these challenges. So big one is reimbursement. Some people don't have insurance. Many insurance companies don't pay for care for pain, or will pay just for single interventions, but not integrated care. Access to care can be really difficult for people who live in rural areas or areas with low socioeconomic status because there isn't good care in those particular regions. Disparities are huge, and we know that different populations can be affected as far as quality care goes because of bias or stigma on the part of the providers or the healthcare systems, but that there are also population differences that need to be considered when we want to deliver the best care for populations that experience health disparities. Training. Training is a big issue for providers in medical school, for example, and also for research. So clinical research, the population was dwindling a bit. And so trying to bring new quality, well-trained researchers into the field has been a challenge and a really important area to address. Mentoring kind of goes along with that. If the mentors are leaving the field or aging out, then training quality is difficult to maintain. One really big thing, and this is probably the most tightly tied to our research program, is how complex pain is. So pain often comes with other comorbidities that are chronic. The mechanisms behind many different pain conditions are quite different. They respond to different treatments, and they may change with age as far as their intensity or the response to treatment. And so that comes to the lifespan issue here, that pain management does not apply across the lifespan in the same way. The risk factors are different, and changes, just physiological changes, make pain management need to be kind of flexible, if you will, over time. And so now I'm going to go through in kind of a high level look at a walk through the pain research portfolio of HEAL, and starting from the really sort of basic biology type research, and then walking a little bit more detail into some of the clinical research that's being done at HEAL, because I think that's probably of more interest to the folks on the call tonight. So at the very sort of early basic stages of research, we've got programs now. We've actually got some large programs. Congress is pushing really hard to get better analgesics, safer analgesics on the market. So we've set up programs where we can look at small molecules, natural products, biologics, and a very, very big area of research that's now opening up is studying the circulatory system at the very, very tiny level of how we can change the brain or the nervous system circuitry in a way that we can modulate pain responses, the pain experience. So actually using the parts of the nervous system that create and hypersensitize, create pain, to try and use the knowledge we learn about those circuits to mitigate pain. That program runs it also into validation of the targets to make sure that they would be safe and robust, etc. Most of this work is in animal models, but we're moving into human models, which we'll come to momentarily. We have a screening platform where we can take promising molecules or products through a number of screens. So it's a way for small laboratories that can bring potential targets to NIH, and for no money and total confidentiality, we will run them through a series of tests to see if they look like they would be promising analgesics, and then give the investigators that output so that they can move them into later studies to really get quality stuff in at the beginning, if you will. We also set up, I think, what we could call sort of a small pharmaceutical company where we can bring in promising molecules and run them through programs where they would be optimized, I think is the right term for the therapeutics development folks, in a way that would include biomarker development at both the target validation stage, but also at the clinical testing stages. So you could bring a small molecule that looked promising in, it would be optimized and then brought through into phase 1 testing for safety in humans. And then we can pop it into what you see over in the far right is HPNA, which is phase 2 testing, would come later to get it closer to clinical approval. And through that, we've already got 8 INDs and 2 IDEs, I think is the number that has come through that program since its onset about 5 years ago. Big program in our small business research arena for device development. And here we've had some good successes with small companies that had some really exciting new devices, especially sort of in the neural circuit, the stimulation realm, and can bring them in for further development and then into clinical trial development. So we've had some really good, exciting successes here. And you can kind of see this little chart shows you what types of devices and interventions are being used on what pain conditions that are in clinical trial development now through HEAL. This one I thought was a really cool example for folks who have pain from amputation or phantom limb pain. The vertical organization of the loss sensation changes. And this is an attempt and creates pain, intense pain in most people with amputations. And so this is a way where a prosthetic device is loaded up with sensors that can actually pick up sort of proprioceptive input, process that through a chip, and feed back to the remaining portion of the neurons. And so try and recreate, if you will, more of the normal sensation that the person would have, with the idea really to reduce the phantom limb pain in the longer term through this kind of a device. So that one I thought was pretty exciting.
Dr. Porter?
Yeah.
If I may interrupt, there's some feedback here, and I'm not quite sure if there's an easy way to get rid of that. It might be through the internet that if you were to stop your video and still have your capability, that may help the interconnectivity. I'm not sure.
Okay, let me try that. Yeah, I have to get back to the screen to get to my video here. All right, does that help a little bit, Barb? We'll see, right?
No, I'm still hearing it. See if Susanna or Rachel have an idea. Let's see. She says, try turning your speakers off, Linda. So just we still hear her.
I turned it off and now back on. No.
Okay. Any other suggestions? Rachel, Susanna?
Other than potentially calling in by phone and doing audio over the phone?
I can do that if you can send me a number. Can you call me? Rachel, can you call my phone to connect?
Linda, I can send you a number.
Okay. Is it so bad that I should wait until I reconnect, or do you want me to keep going?
We might have to resolve it before we can continue. It's
Okay.
I apologize.
I don't usually have a problem, but who knows?
Yeah, it sounds like there's more than one speaker on. So
Linda, there's a number in your calendar invite.
Bear with me. I have 2 calendar invites. Should I use the one in the speaker invite? No, it doesn't have one.
Linda, I also just put it in the chat for you.
Okay, I think I found it.
Thank you everyone for your patience.
Uh-oh. That's taking the meeting number, Rachel. Let me try one quick thing is maybe I can just try a different microphone. You may not be able to hear me. How about that?
Yes, you're no longer echoing.
Oh. This one is okay?
Oh, yes. Yay.
Sounds good.
That's working well. Thank you, everyone.
All right, sorry about that. It's a different microphone. There are 3 of them in this room. Okay, so I'm just gonna pick up where I left off and talk a tiny bit more quickly. This particular program is brand new, and what it's intending to do is to make our models much more human relevant because we're using human tissues. So these are human tissues that are collected from transplant centers or a tissue bank. They're all neuro tissues. And then they can be brought in for study. So we can look at different parts of the nervous system, the components that we've been able to collect from all these centers, and use the circuitry and different types of technologies to actually develop look at target validation, et cetera, in human tissues. The assays are pretty sophisticated. We have a big internal NIH program to run a lot of different human tissue type assays. And the idea is to take all this information that we've collected along with the phenotypic information that came with from the transplant centers about the person and about the pain condition that they had, in the hopes that we can look at really powerful molecular signatures along with the phenotypic information to develop new analgesics that might be molecularly driven or circuit driven through the nervous system. Okay, and that's again. And so moving from there, what we really need for not only the basic research components, but also in the clinical realm are biomarkers for pain, particularly difficult because of the number of different pain conditions that don't share underlying mechanisms. And so we needed diagnostic and prognostic biomarkers in the clinic to be able to identify, for example, corneal pain. Is this an inflammatory problem or is this a neuropathic problem? It should be treated differently. So we're working on that as a diagnostic marker. And then for a number of different pain conditions, we have large 5 or 6 year programs that are focusing on biomarkers for the specific conditions that you see over here on the left. And then for the research agenda, we really need markers where we can look at the targets that we're studying to see if they respond based on the biomarker, or if over time that the person's condition can be monitored according to the intervention that's being applied. And so these biomarkers are incredibly important. A big investment here. And the technologies are being developed to get better biomarkers, and the data for all of these biomarker programs. It has to come in, the award has to propose how they will analyze the data that they are finding. So now moving into the clinical networks that were developed for pain through HEAL. This is the phase 2 network, the safety network, where new drugs or repurposed drugs could come in for testing and see if they look like they are safe enough and there's enough efficacy to move them into larger clinical trials. So we're currently running 2. There's one on knee osteoarthritis with a novel compound, and there's one being done in painful diabetic neuropathy, which has few treatments, is really prevalent. Both of these conditions are prevalent. And we're hoping over the next year or so we'll have some information and be able to move some new compounds into further clinical testing. We also established a very broad comparative effectiveness research where we have a coordinating center for both the clinical side and for the data management side. And through that network, we've been able to run more than half a dozen large trials over the past 5 years and increasing those numbers on all these different conditions. So we've got a great range of conditions that we have been testing and a lot of different types of interventions. Some are multimodal and some are single modalities and in different populations. So hopefully in the next year or two, one of these is finished, the cesarean pain one. And another one, just as a note of mention, is being run through the National Institute for Nursing Research. So high relevance, I hope, to this audience, and it's being managed by the Nursing Research Institute because it's really focused on how how a nursing management model can improve the intervention for the patients in that trial. And then we have another large network that we're running pragmatic trials through. And this is a network that is embedded in healthcare systems. It relies heavily on electronic health record information draws. So the amount of data that comes out of these trials is huge. And what we have done so far is to look at a number of different diseases and different types of interventions being applied to help mitigate pain in those disease conditions. So we're hoping to move all of these programs forward for another 5 years, bring in different types of interventions, look at different parts of the lifespan and different interventions. We also have a program which started just a few years ago, looking at appropriate interventions in populations who experience health disparities. And so we've got 11 trials that target different populations with different needs and different pain conditions. A couple of pediatric trials, one's in a Hispanic population, and some in disadvantaged people over 65, different ethnicities. So it's a really broad range of populations that typically are not getting good health care, that typically the health care they do get may not be culturally appropriate for them. So these studies can be run at different levels of whether it's at an individual level or all the way up through delivery of care through a health system. And it's not just a simple translation of forms into the appropriate language. It's much more than that. It's really looking at delivery in communities where the healthcare the interventions would be better taken up and better delivered and so more effective. And also that they're culturally appropriate interventions delivered in a way that's meaningful to the particular population. And this one, again, I highlight, the whole program is run through the nursing, the National Institute of Nursing Research. And we're really excited about this one. It involves nurses in the studies but it really involves communities. So one of the things that was required in these awards, where before they get through the first phase of their award, they have to actually build the community efforts and the community outreach into the trials that they're running. And because these are for rural or remote populations, we felt that this was a really a key important dissemination factor, if you will. And so I'll give you a little bit more information on the individual trials in a couple of minutes, but keep in mind that those who live in rural populations have a much higher rate of chronic pain and high impact chronic pain than those are in urban, and it's mostly access to care. We have a program now that's looking at people who have pain and are being treated for opioid use disorder, as well as people who have pain and are on long-term opioid therapies, so maybe at risk for opioid use disorder. And these involve a number of different small trials, testing out almost at a pilot level, different types of interventions where you would get a safe, effective pain management program that would mitigate the use of opioids. And one of the resources that we expect to get out of this early on is a risk assessment factor, a risk assessment form rather, that could be used to identify people on long-term opioids who are likely at risk. Some may be safely on them, and sometime, but we would want to be able to identify those whose treatments for pain needed to be altered a bit, tailored a bit, I think is a better word. And then we have a big program. I'm almost through with all the networks. We've really, really built the infrastructures. I think you're getting the sense. We have a program that's specifically on back pain, and it's got resources all the way from developing diagnostic tools built into the program. And they've actually already completed testing of some of these. There are different types of sensors to help assess and diagnose different types of back pain. There are wearables that help prevent back pain. They're working on biomarkers, heavy phenotyping, biopsychosocial features in a trial that they're running using all the information that they've gathered so far. And that trial is called the BEST trial, Biomarkers for Evaluating Spine Treatments. And the BEST trial is set up basically as a means to randomize randomize people who come in with diagnosed, so they know the etiology of their back pain, are given a specific intervention, which includes duloxetine, it includes physical therapy, it includes CBT, and it includes mindfulness. And they move, if they don't respond to the randomized arm, they would move to another one. And an incredible amount of information is collected with the idea that the data, phenotypic data, physiological data, will be run through a huge data assessment platform that's already been built so that we could start to tailor or personalize treatment for back pain. This gives you a very, very high level look at what pain conditions and what interventions that HEAL is testing across all of these different clinical platforms for the HEAL program. And big thing for HEAL is data. We're collecting immense amounts of data. We know it needs to be harmonized at the input side so that we can more easily translate it. We're building platforms using AI and other technologies to be able to analyze it as it comes in. And we're building a huge ecosystem to support the sharing of data, making sure it's really open, but also as a means to deposit all the data when the studies finish up that can be shared across the HEAL community and beyond. So recognizing that everything we collect is more valuable if it's collected for the greater good, if you will, rather than for individual studies. And then moving to a really different part of HEAL, where we understand this is a real investment in the future for clinical pain research. We've got a number of different programs to support early stage investigators, to build the mentoring population, to help accelerate postdoctoral fellowships, if you will, into independent research programs. We have a national K-12, which is a mentoring program embedded in the training program at the University of Michigan, but it's matching up mentors and scholars from across the country. They're not all from Michigan. In fact, they're not allowed to all be from Michigan. And then if you haven't yet checked out the Purpose platform, PURPOSE, we have a program now. It's an internet, it's an electronically based program, and it's set up as a platform to meet other investigators, to find people in your area, to maybe start up some collaborations. It offers training programs. It has an annual meeting where early stage investigators come, meet other investigators, senior investigators. They can sit down in a room and learn from one another. It offers all kinds of opportunities for networking. If you want to open up your own room, you can use that to share in a very private way. A group that wants to write a grant together. It's just really, really flexible, and has gotten really big so far. So it's called Purpose, easy to find on the NIH HEAL Initiative website. I mentioned earlier, community engagement has been incredibly important to us as we build HEAL. So we have a partner committee that meets quarterly and has given us some really valuable input on what's meaningful to them in the research endeavor. And we support their recommendations through an internal work group. They've asked us to look at what are your HEAL studies doing now in the area of patient engagement in their studies? Do they have an advisory board that's made of people with lived experience? Do they compensate them for their efforts? Do they ask them to help with reviews? Sort of like, what are we doing now? And what are we going to do? How can we do it better? They've also suggested that we write into our funding solicitations a requirement that there has to be community engagement in their studies, and that they should include in their budgets the dollars needed in order to do that well. So there's just some of the examples of where they've helped us out overall, but within most but not all of the clinical studies, there's a much more high level of engagement of stakeholders than there was at the beginning of HEAL. So we're working really hard to have their voices heard as the science moves forward. So go back to this slide, and I put it back up again because I wanted to compare some of these things that are outside of what we would normally think of as a research program that HEAL is touched upon. And I think I've mentioned something relevant to each one of those boxes, except maybe the reimbursement. And so we have been working with Centers for Medicare, with CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, to run studies that would give them an evidence base to pay, for example, acupuncture in people over 65. So we did a study with them, and it's now reimbursed through CMS. We're working with them on what means would be possible that are evidence-based to pay for packaged or integrated care, if you will. So that's moving along. Definitely needs more in that realm, but I think if you look at the boxes here that we've begun to check off some of the real challenges to good pain care through the research program. So I want to spend a few minutes now talking about the outstanding nurses that have worked with us from the very beginning with HEAL, or from programs that have informed HEAL. And this is a short list of names. There are many more, but some of those that really stand out. HEAL has a federally mandated advisory committee, and Judy Pace has worked on that since the very beginning. She's also worked on a partner committee, which has helped us with recommendations for how we run our analgesic development programs. We've got investigators who are nurses who have awards from HEAL, from the Effectiveness Research Network. A lot of them are from the Pragmatic Trials Network. And we also have had a number of trainees over the last several years who are nurses. And these include some that are not HEAL, but are definitely in the pain arena for training. And so out of all of the awards, we've got 7% went to nurses for K awards, which are early stage career development awards. 8% of those are already completed. And these are small ends, but this is a lot considering that these are all the disciplines that are eligible to get these awards. In the programmatic staff at NIH, Karen Keel has been wonderful. She runs the rural pain program. Barb mentioned early on the Interagency Pain Research Coordinating Committee. This is the group that did the National Pain Strategy, the Federal Pain Research Strategy. It's also federally mandated. And we've had nursing representation on that committee from the very beginning. We currently have Paul Arnstein and Renee Van Warren on the committee as present members. So huge contribution from nurses to HEAL. And with that said, just a couple of highlights of where the specific programs that the nursing community is involved in running. And this is through the Effectiveness Research Network. They're looking at chronic musculoskeletal pain and applying different treatment arms where the patients would get duloxetine plus CBT, duloxetine plus CBT plus nurse support, to see if the nursing support really helps them adhere to and improve the outcomes of the interventions in the trial. And then the rural pain program has 3 studies that are about to start up. And again, this is run through the Nursing Research Institute. The first one, very briefly, is looking at care delivered remotely for strength training and CBT. And this is with nurse input. And there's another one that's done by telehealth with physical therapy delivered virtually. And another one for rural veterans using mind-body skill training to as a self-management strategy for pain with the help of nursing coaches. And so last but not least, a few things that I want to mention as resources that we built for the research agenda that might be helpful to those of you in clinical practice. I mentioned that we are trying to harmonize data as it comes in across all the studies. And so we are requiring that all HEAL pain-related studies collect certain CDEs or protocols for the, sorry, not protocols, questionnaires for pain phenotyping in different domains. And so we've been very specific about which ones they have to collect. They're low burden. They're harmonized from the very beginning as far as the definitions and how that they're set up. So this will be really easy to translate across studies. These are available in a public repository for anybody who might want to use them in their clinical practice. We also set up kind of a related resource with the help of, or in partnership with CMS. And this is a a website that offers a whole list of assessment tools, questionnaires that could be used to help assess chronic pain in the clinic, either in a primary care clinic or in a specialty clinic. And we've got pages and pages of assessment tools where we've looked at the domain, how many questions it is, so you know the burden if you had to use it very quickly in the waiting room or in your clinic, and whether it's copyrighted and whether it's produced in different languages. So again, you can find all these things really easily on the HEAL website, or you can contact me if you can't find them. We are going to be putting out an MME calculator in probably the spring that can be put into REDCap. It's really for our research studies, but if you need it in the clinic, it's a way for us just to pull from the electronic health records, for example, or the study protocols, and it will automatically tell you what your MME equivalent doses are for whatever prescription and dosing and duration that you're using in your study. Then a few minutes on what's coming up in HEAL, because I think we've got a lot of things that will be reissued. We hope most of the networks that have been established will continue, but also wanted to give you an idea of what's coming in the very near future for enhancing, expanding the HEAL research endeavor. So we have a program looking at individual differences in human pain conditions, and this is just an expansive phenotyping across all the different studies that are going on. So this would be omics and biopsychosocial questionnaires. We're just about to launch the first of 2 phases, pediatric pain research. The acute one is on its way out, and hopefully we'll be starting some trials soon for acute pain in different settings and in different pain conditions for children. And then there will be, following up that, a chronic pain management program that will provide resources for both the acute pain clinical trials, also for some chronic pain studies that will be associated with the program. There is an initiative out for wearables for monitoring and collecting data on pain. And these can be either physiological endpoints or activity monitoring. We all usually think of a watch, and there's much more beyond that that can be useful in trials and for monitoring intervention success, if you will. Coming soon is a means to embed coordinated care into healthcare settings, so an implementation set of studies. And then there are a couple in here from the opioid side that I thought were interesting. And so they're kind of scattered in here. Their postpartum care for women in recovery now is incredibly important given all the perinatal drug exposure. And then we are working in a program with American Indian and Alaska Natives to help them establish a research infrastructure and then provide funding to run studies of most import to their particular population, using those resources and using the help of NIH as they move forward with the studies. So I think this may be of interest. This is the NINR strategic plan that's on their website that kind of talks about what their new research, the things that they're looking at overall and why, and in the types of settings. So you may want to go to their website and look at that. But before I close now for questions, I put this slide up just as a way to how all these research findings and the resources and the expanded research community might be most relevant to clinical practice for nursing in the near future, hopefully the very near future. And so knowing what interventions are most effective for what pain conditions And all of the interventions being tested are really monitoring opioid use with the idea of mitigating reliance on opioids. And I think the voices of people with lived experience are making those studies more relevant to the populations that we are trying to improve the lives with the research. And so hopefully that will help in the nursing arena as well as all other areas of pain care. We've got some tools which we hope will be helpful in screening and assessment, and really strong focus on health inequities in pain and addiction treatment. So I'll stop there and see if there are questions in the chat that I should pull up, or if
Yeah, thank you. I'll help you with that.
oh, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for, I just want to hear the applause throughout the world on this is so wonderful. One of the questions in the Q&A box, and feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box or to the chat, whichever you're more comfortable with. One of the questions is around racial pain disparities that are persisting. Most studies that inform current interventions and biomarkers were done in predominantly white individuals. Are there any HEAL RFAs focusing on biomarker discovery and mechanisms in racialized minorities?
That's a great question. So, I think most of what you saw from the presentation was that there are a lot of interventions that are being tailored to racial and ethnic minorities. But the biomarker development, let me think through the ones that we've got, are probably mostly not tailored. And so we've got one biomarker trial on adolescents, one on musculoskeletal pain in the general population of adults, and those are not racially or ethnic specific. We do, and so the others as well. So we've got a number of different pain conditions that we're looking at, and we do collect, however, all the demographics on the populations that are included in the studies. We've also been really, really cognizant of monitoring the racial ethnic mix of the population that is being pulled into these studies. And if they are not meeting the expected population levels, percentages in the population that they're studying of racial ethnic minorities, then we work with the investigators to either selectively begin recruitment or maybe open new sites to make sure that we get those populations. So the answer is they're not, the studies, the RFAs are not specifically looking at at biomarkers in different populations, but what we're doing, we can clearly pull that from the data that's being collected.
Good.
Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah.
Another question is, there's emphasis on finding new treatments for chronic pain. We know what works for chronic pain, interdisciplinary, multimodal pain programs. We just don't have reimbursement models to pay for it. As opposed to looking for new treatments, why not just focus on funding what we know works?
So that's a little bit more difficult from the NIH point of view, but we have been working with CMS and trying to use some avenues through CMS to begin to reimburse for, so we've got acupuncture was added. That's if it's a one tiny small step, but we're working with them on how to build reimbursement strategies for multidisciplinary care. They have that for cardiac rehab, they have it for other conditions. And so there's been a fair bit of work going into how that might be managed. And so the idea behind starting with CMS, if CMS begins to lead the way, then the private sector will be more likely to begin reimbursement. But totally agree with the idea behind that statement is, yes, a lot of things work. and we need to move them forward. The other step that we're taking is some of the programs that I mentioned, especially the pragmatic ones, are in healthcare systems, and the coordinated care one will be in healthcare systems. And so they would be required in some of those programs to implement, not just test, but to implement multidisciplinary programs that we know work. And so AHRQ has done some studies about what works and what doesn't. And so with that as a basis, the idea will be to pull them into a healthcare system, and the research will be implementation based of how do you get them embedded in the healthcare system. Hopefully that will be a win-win for the healthcare system, both patient outcome and financial outcome for the system. And so that's one way that we can approach the reimbursement question.
Great, thank you. That was a difficult question.
It's a difficult
Yeah.
thing to do.
Yes, yes. Another question is, what are considered a biomarker? Whoops, it moved on me. What about biometric sensors for soft tissue inflammation measurable on the skin surface?
Ooh, that's a great question too. And maybe this is just slightly off target for the question, but we have a program on biomarkers specifically for myofascial tissue, but it's myofascial and associated tissue. So skin may be included in some of those, but it's developing new technologies that are non-invasive for the most part, to look in changes in tissue tension, inflammatory markers, other circulating markers, and a couple of other things, just changes in different tissues. So I think to some extent that gets at the question, but that's really expanding what we were thinking about in the past of what we needed biomarkers for. This is very tissue specific, and myofascial tissue in particular. But we recognize that's probably a big part of almost every pain condition is myofascial pain. And so hopefully that gets a little bit at the question that the person is asking.
Definitely. And then another question is anybody using Loretta, I guess that's how you'd say the acronym, neurofeedback to treat and reverse the central component of pain?
So actually I need the acronym for Loretta, but if it's central mechanism for feedback, I mentioned one of the peripheral mechanisms, and I don't think the answer gets at the question of things like deep brain stimulation is being used in a number of different situations, but that's not so much for feedback in the way I think the question is being asked, but they're applying ultrasound targeted electrostimulation to neural circuits, targeting deep brain stimulation to different areas. There's a really cool study that just came out, partly funded by the Brain Initiative and partly funded by the HEAL Initiative, where they embedded electrodes into the anterior cingulate and the prefrontal cortex, and looked at ongoing input over weeks in chronic pain patients. So these are people, very few people, with phantom limb or post-stroke pain. And so those electrodes are embedded, they're monitored over time on a daily basis, and then they also are testing them for an acute pain stimulus to see if the different areas of the brain respond differently, with the idea that over the long term, you could maybe modulate those circuits to dampen either the chronic pain response or the acute pain response or acute pain stimulation.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, will the MME calculator be an app or only available for use in REDCap?
For the very beginning, my understanding is it will be for REDCap. But I would think that it's a pretty easy transition to go into an app. And so I'm going to bring it back to the team and see if they're thinking about that yet. I'm not sure.
Great, great. Another individual says, thank you, Dr. Porter, for a wonderful presentation. And asking, can you give an example of specific biomarkers being researched in the HEAL initiative? I think you.
Yeah, so I had a little sign up that said corneal pain was a diagnostic marker. And so in that study, they have an sort of an on your desk, and I don't know what it looks like, but it's a very simplified confocal microscope scanning technology where they can actually look at the neural changes in the eye to see if they are indicative of neuropathic pain or if it's an inflammation. And I don't remember exactly what the confocal imaging tells you, but that's embedded in the study. And so the important piece there was if it is neuropathic pain, you treat it very differently than if it's inflammatory pain in the cornea. So that's one example. The range of biomarkers that are being collected at this point includes mostly prognostic biomarkers. And so that would be disease progression, for example, and they're usually a set of biomarker, like a signature. And so that signature would be a collection of predictive markers. And that, if I can digress a little bit from HEAL for a second, I'd love to tell you a tiny bit of a Common Fund program that we're doing for trying to find predictive signatures for people who will go from a major surgical procedure, 2 cohorts. One is for total knee replacement and one is for thoracic surgery. And what predictive markers will be able to tell us who is more likely to transition to chronic pain after the surgical procedure than other people. So we're doing omics, we're doing characteristic phenotyping, we're doing brain imaging, we're doing functional assessments, and looking at cohorts of like 1,600 people in each group to see if we can package together a set of clinically relevant biomarkers that you could apply to a person before they come in for the surgery and predict if they need to be treated differently, or maybe they're not good candidates, for example, for the surgery. So that's a big study. And we're, in our probably 2 more years, we'll be finished.
Wow, wow, interesting. Another question is the research reviewed is looking at the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system signatures. Is there any work looking at the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems? Many nursing activities are geared to calm the sympathetic system by non-drug interventions to stimulate the parasympathetic activity to reduce sensitization of neurons.
Yeah. So that's actually a topic of interest now. And I know there are a couple of vagal nerve studies. They're outside of HEAL, and I'm not really familiar with them, but there are a couple that are going on, and I want to say one is for IBS maybe, but I just don't know the details that well. It's outside of our program. So yes, but a very wishy-washy details on the response.
Yeah, thank you. The next question, are there any programs looking at integration of complementary approaches such as Reiki, acupressure, massage, meditation, etc.?
Yeah, so actually a lot of the studies that came through the first round of not only the effectiveness research, but also the pragmatic trial research network were non-pharmacological. And of those, a few are integrated, and then some of the others are single modalities being tested. but certainly they include mindfulness. Reiki is not on the list. Acupuncture, there are several studies going on in acupuncture. One of the acupuncture ones is integrated with relaxation techniques, so acupuncture and mindfulness there. The pragmatic studies actually were exclusive of drugs in their studies. It's all non-pharmacological. So there is a fair bit. They're not all integrated, but some of them do test one or more modalities together. Yoga's not in there, sorry, but mindfulness is definitely in a number of them. And some of them have CBT combined with mindfulness. So it's a good range. So I think I can easily say yes. We should have some good information on that.
And this is the second part of that same question. Are any of these programs looking at comorbid chronic pain and PTSD?
There are several. So one of the health equities programs had to be in comorbid, a pain plus a comorbid condition. So there's 6 studies there, and they are all on pain and a mental health condition. I am not certain that we have a PTSD in there. We should, because it's super important. But there's definitely depression and anxiety that are comorbid, and we're looking for treatments that would be applicable to both. I don't think there's PTSD. We have a biomarker program that's looking for headache-induced, PTSD-induced headache, but that's not really what the question is asking.
Okay. This next question, and I apologize to the person who wrote it. I may have some difficulty reading it. It says, my experience as a therapist and massage chair, massage research committee, is there tools to measure pain objectively? However, my hands have been able to find points where patients feel pain when I applied pressure, or pressure reduced their pain when applying it over the pressure points. As someone who is trying to apply for grants twice unsuccessfully thus far, why is the answers, I'm not sure if I'm reading this right, I know work that could be provided to your organization been so onerous? I do not feel that my door knock does not make sense, but on when I know with certainty and have a ton of patient testimonials that identify the outcomes, yet opioids may be advancing the addictive issue, are receiving $20 million grants. What are the reasons? I think this question is about, here's a therapist who provides very good care and is trying to get funding to prove the techniques that are being used are beneficial.
Okay, so that's a kind of an answer with a horse of a different color. So funding at NIH, this is just a very overview statement that will help sort of set the stage here, is either through solicited request for applications that's very targeted to a specific condition or a specific research topic. So you can watch for those to see if there's something in your area of research interest. But almost all of our research at NIH, the vast majority of it, is investigator initiated. And so you don't have to respond to a particular notice for applications. The best way to approach that, to see what opportunities are, would be to speak with the program staff at the institute or center that would be most likely interested in your area for research. And I would suggest that's probably the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health. Program staff is incredibly helpful and they would help with, understanding what it is that you really want to look at in a research environment, and how you might begin to develop an application that would fit into their research mission. And so it's hard to get in, and unless you really have a good experience with writing grants and what the NIH is looking for in a grant application. But the staff can be super helpful. It sounds like you've got a good practice. People are responding to your treatment. Massage is definitely of interest as a treatment opportunity, intervention for people, especially with musculoskeletal pain. And we've done studies in that area. So I would get in touch with the program staff at NCCIH. It's easy to find them on the website.
Thank you. Next question. Are there any programs looking at extreme pain syndrome, such as complex regional pain syndrome or reflex sympathetic dystrophy?
Yeah, so outside of HEAL, there is. We had some programs to develop models for CRPS as far, as a research model to be able to do more basic research. Trying to think if we have, HEAL does not have an ongoing trial in CRPS, but definitely recognize it as a condition with severe pain and of high unmet need. And so some of our analgesic development programs are targeted to conditions like that, where we have a relatively small population, incredibly disabling disorder, and very little treatments to offer people who have CRPS. And I think that would really be a very integrative pain management program that would be needed for those folks. And so not currently currently funding a study specifically on CRPS and HEAL, but there is some more basic research done, I think, primarily at NIH.
Great, thank you. There's a nice comment here. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. What are the current best practices, treatments with great evidence for treating chronic pain? Does multidisciplinary management really work for chronic pain? If so, how effective is it?
Yes, so there have been a couple of studies that would be probably of high interest to you that came out of AHRQ, and they've been published within the last couple of years, and one a few years before that. So what they looked at was expansive literature review, which is what they do, on multidisciplinary care for a handful of pain conditions. So they selected prevalent pain conditions and looked at integrated care for those different conditions. And when you look at the literature review, there's definitely an effect that's positive for most of the conditions. It's not a strong, they will rate the effectiveness based on all the combined applicable studies. But I would have a look at AHRQ's website and see what's in there. There are a lot of different combinations that they looked at in the literature review, and a number of different prevalent pain conditions, chronic pain conditions. So the answer is yes, they do work. And our sense is that we need to look more at multidisciplinary treatments than at individual interventions in our studies. And I think that will be a big focus of the HEAL reissues. And we also need to move to the next step where we do know where some of these multidisciplinary integrated care programs are effective, moving them into implementation. And that's partly what the coordinated care and the pragmatic trials are doing.
Thank you. How does someone in a small practice or university find support for applying for an NIH grant with limited resources? It seems most funding goes to bigger universities or practices with more resources.
Yeah. So there are some programs that are targeted to institutions with a small number historically of small amount rather, of NIH funding. And it's only those institutions that are eligible for that type of funding. I think they include that there has to be an education component built into it. So we do have some programs that are for under-resourced small academic centers or clinics. And I want to say they're called R25s, but I think I got the number wrong. It would be better to check on the website. And again, depending on what your area of interest is, what your practice is, what type of research you're thinking about, it would be really important to give a call to the appropriate institute and have a chat with them about what you have for preliminary data, for example, or what kind of studies might not need too much for preliminary data, what an under-resourced environment would be eligible for, if you're an early stage investigator, how you might benefit from the programs that are specifically targeted to people who are within 10 years of their final degree, and see what might be best. There's some small grants for kind of pilot studies from different institutes. They use them very differently. And so it's really important, if you're doing arthritis, to call that institute and see what they've got for different types of funding mechanisms, or neurology if you're doing diabetic nerve pain, for example, because they do differ. But there are some resources. It's definitely, it's limited, but there are some.
Okay, so we have 4 minutes left. Your voice is holding out great, so I'll just continue if you're okay.
Okay.
Are the funding opportunities to use mind-body interventions to help, are there funding opportunities to use mind-body interventions to help nurses relieve and prevent pain?
Nurses would be eligible like everybody else. So yes, and HEAL usually puts out targeted solicitations. So they would be putting out a call for, yes, we want non-pharmacological interventions in the aging population, or we want it for pediatrics. So you need to kind of watch for those. I don't think there's anything on the street right now. But as we're coming into our program renewals, I think there will be more coming out in the near future. But certainly, nurses are eligible. And if you've got the research environment and the research training, then keep an eye out. There are many open funding opportunities right now for HEAL that cover a range of different opportunities. And so they're very up to date on the website. And if you just go to NIH HEAL Initiative and look for open funding opportunities, you can kind of see what's in there. But you do need to monitor it, or you can, I think there used to be the NIH guide mailing where they would mail you things. I don't know if that exists anymore. I haven't done program for a while, but the website's really up to date.
Great, great. Different language speakers must support studies resolving health disparities. If we don't have the human resources to serve as researchers, we cannot solve health disparity problems. We need not only one researcher, but also a research team with certain language speakers. Is there any funding support for constructing a diversity research team, or can we start to establish a research pool with race diversity specifically focused on certain topics? That is a good resource to find collaborators access locally or in the country.
That's a great question. So a couple of different ways to begin to address your question. We have across NIH, but in HEAL as well, supplements to applications that are ongoing, like a supplement to an R01 to support trainees who are from diverse backgrounds or underrepresented backgrounds. So we have specific training programs for folks in that area. And we also have sort of NIH is really starting to work on developing the workforce in a number of different areas, and that includes diversity. So there's no one place where we have, and I may have misunderstood this part of the question, where there's a resource where you could kind of find people that were interested in your area but represented a different population. That I don't know exists, but there's certainly a lot of attempts to build a more diverse workforce. And it's partly through supplementary funding. It's partly through grants that, we're really looking for we want to make sure there's a diverse population, not only in your cohort, but in your workforce. We had large supplements through HEAL to train people to bring in diverse populations and reach out to diverse people who are from diverse populations to join the workforce. And I think we put maybe 12 of those that were add-ons to some of the big HEAL studies. So there's an effort definitely ongoing.
Great. Well, we have one last question. The periaqueductal gray and sensory thalamus are also targets for deep brain stimulation in post-stroke pain.
Yep.
Devices can deliver stimulation and record from deep brain targets. It is a mystery why treatment response is never 100%, and we need to understand why this is. Mood and self-efficacy may predict response, and we are collecting EEGs, ERPs, and autonomic measures. In chronic pain, there is likely to be an effect of catastrophizing and degree of hopelessness and treatment seeking. Not sure what the question is, but is there any studies in this area?
So, it's a great statement, and I agree with everything that's embedded in that statement. The device development program has a number of different targets, and I think there's one that's specific to periaqueductal gray. I would have to double check that. But yeah, it's a really important area of research. Again, circuit modulation for pain management is a hot area now because we know so much about the brain circuitry. I mean, we know so much, but there's so much more to learn. And so if we can leverage what we've already learned, we're trying hard to integrate what we're picking up from the Brain Initiative, which is another big initiative like HEAL, but very, very much targeted to mapping out circuits that are related to different conditions. It's not pain specific. It's much broader than that. And begin to understand how we can leverage that into adapting treatment modalities. So, great question. Really important area of research at this point. And a lot of it comes, the device development itself comes from our SPIR programs, who are not so much into the neural circuitry of research, but can leverage it for adapting their devices to the right circuits.
Great, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful questions. Now, we do have some webinar chat links that are in there, so be sure to check those out. And I want to say that your evaluations will be emailed to you, and then you complete those and submit that for your certificate. And thank you very much. Good response and good responses and a great presentation. Someone is asking, can these links be sent to me, as I cannot copy and paste? Is there, I think that we do have a way to do that. So we'll do our best for you. Thank you, Dr. Porter. Very informative, very relevant to nursing and what we're doing for people in pain and the disease of addiction. So I really appreciate everything you've done and all of your information today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Yep.
Say, Linda?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many people are still on, but the president of ASPMN had asked if she can get your address. Is the address at the NIH a good one for her to send a card?
Absolutely. Yep.
Oh.
That'd be great. Thanks. Okay. I'm just looking for my depart button and say good night.
Okay, I'll hang on. I'll keep you company.
Don't leave me here forever, right?
Don't
No. Yeah, it's not opening up the whole thing.
Ah, so the
I'll
leave.
shut it down now. I was just copying the links.
Okay. Oh, good. Oh, I'm glad you did that. Are you going to put that through?
Yeah.
Maybe we could have it through ASPMN as well as through your networks, Rachel. I really appreciate that.
Okay, I found my leave button. Thanks very much. This was
Fabulous,
great.
Linda.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.